It all started with a dare. My friends and I, Mike, Emily, and Chris, had always been thrill seekers, and our small town didn't offer much excitement. So, when rumors started spreading about the abandoned house on Ridgeway Road, it didn't take long for Mike to suggest we check it out. "They say it's haunted," he whispered one evening as we sat around a campfire behind Chris's house. His face was half lit by the flickering flames, casting shadows that made his grin look even more mischievous. Emily rolled her eyes. "It's just an old house. I bet it's empty." "Only one way to find out," Chris added, tossing another log onto the fire. I hesitated. There were plenty of stories about that place. Some said it had been abandoned for decades after the owner mysteriously vanished. Others whispered about strange lights at night and whispers carried on the wind. But I didn't want to be the only one backing out, so I agreed. The next night, we piled into Chris's car and made the short drive out to Ridgeway Road. The house loomed at the end of a gravel path, hidden behind overgrown bushes and towering trees. Its windows were shattered, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years of neglect. We parked a little way down the road, not wanting to draw attention, and made our way toward the entrance. The air was thick with fog, swirling around our ankles as we walked. I could feel my heart pounding harder with every step. "Last chance to back out," Mike teased, nudging me with his elbow. I forced a laugh. "I'm not scared." The front door was half open, creaking as we stepped inside. The floor groaned under our weight, and the air smelled of mold and dust. Faded wallpaper peeled off the walls, and broken glass littered the floor. "Cozy," Emily said, shining her flashlight around. Dust danced in the beam, glittering like tiny ghosts. "Let's split up," Chris suggested. "We can cover more ground that way." I wanted to argue, but before I could, Mike had already wandered off with Emily trailing behind him. Chris and I exchanged a look and headed toward the back of the house. The kitchen was a mess of broken cabinets and shattered dishes. An old refrigerator stood in the corner, its door slightly ajar. Chris grabbed the handle and pulled it open. Inside was empty, except for a layer of dust and the faint smell of rot. "Guess we're not getting any snacks," he joked. We moved on, exploring room after room, all filled with the remains of a life long forgotten. Dusty chairs, old newspapers, and cracked mirrors filled the space. But something felt off. The house was too quiet. Suddenly, there was a crash from upstairs. Chris and I locked eyes, fear flashing between us. "Mike, Emily," I called out. No response. We moved toward the stairs, each step groaning louder than the last. At the top, the hallway stretched out before us, lined with doors that seemed to whisper as we passed. "They're probably just messing with us," Chris whispered, though his voice was shaking. We reached the last door. It was slightly ajar, shadows pooling around its edges. Chris reached for the handle, his hand trembling. He pushed it open, and the door swung wide, revealing nothing. The room was empty, just bare walls and a broken window. No sign of Mike or Emily. "That doesn't make sense," I whispered. "Where are they?" Chris stepped forward, shining his flashlight around. The light landed on a small door in the corner of the room. It was almost hidden, painted the same color as the wall. I wouldn't have noticed it if not for the faint scratch marks along its edge. "You see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Chris nodded, swallowing hard. He stepped forward and pulled the door open. It groaned loudly, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling up into darkness. "There's an attic?" Chris asked, his voice shaking. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and started climbing. The steps creaked and sagged under my weight, and the air grew colder with each step. At the top, a low ceiling forced us to crouch as we entered the attic. It was dark, the only light coming from our flashlights. Old trunks lined the walls, and cobwebs hung like lace from the rafters. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the center of the room, two chairs sat side by side. One of them had a thick rope wrapped around its legs, the knots frayed and loose. "What is this?" Chris whispered. Before I could answer, I heard it, a whisper, soft and slow, curling through the darkness like smoke. My flashlight flickered, and the whisper grew louder, like voices overlapping, building into a chorus. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. Chris nodded, but as we turned to leave, the trapdoor slammed shut behind us. We froze, our flashlights flickering. I rushed to the door, yanking on the handle. It wouldn't budge. Chris joined me, both of us pulling and kicking, but it was locked tight. "Help!" Chris shouted, his voice cracking. The whispers grew louder, filling the room like the rustling of leaves in a storm. I turned my flashlight back to the chairs, and my heart stopped. A figure now sat in the chair with the rope, tall, thin, its face hidden in shadow. Its head tilted slowly in our direction, and I saw eyes, dark and empty, locked onto mine. I screamed, pulling harder on the trapdoor. Finally, with a loud crack, it flew open. We stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling over each other in our rush. We ran through the house, out the front door, and didn't stop until we reached the car. Mike and Emily were waiting by the car, their faces pale. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. I couldn't answer. I just looked back at the house, its windows dark and empty, as if it had never been touched. We never went back to Ridgeway Road. I still don't know who, or what, was sitting in that chair. But sometimes, when I drive past that stretch of road, I can almost see the house peeking through the trees, waiting for its next visitors. I love hosting dinner parties. There's just something about gathering friends around a table, sharing food, and laughing late into the night. So when I decided to throw a small dinner party last month, I was excited to bring everyone together. I invited my closest friends, Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and John. But there was someone new this time. His name was Edward, a friend of a friend who had just moved into town. Edward was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that seemed to always be looking just past you, like he was searching for something invisible. He spoke very little when he arrived, only offering a polite smile and a quiet nod. I chalked it up to shyness. Moving to a new town can be tough, after all. The evening started off just as I'd planned. Laughter filled the air as we shared stories, clinking glasses, and feasting on roasted chicken and fresh bread. Edward mostly listened, occasionally nodding or smiling faintly when someone made a joke. I tried to bring him into the conversation, but his answers were always short and vague. After dinner, we moved into the living room for some dessert. I brought out a freshly baked apple pie, and everyone helped themselves, chatting happily. But as I served Edward his slice, he caught my wrist. His grip was cold, icy, even. His eyes locked with mine, and he whispered, "Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be home." Home. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. But before I could ask, he released my wrist and went back to eating, his face expressionless. I brushed it off, assuming he was just trying to be polite. The rest of the evening passed smoothly, and soon my friends began to say their goodbyes. Edward, however, lingered behind, standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. "Edward, would you like me to call you a cab?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. He turned slowly, his eyes still distant. "No, I think I'll stay a while." I paused, confused. "Stay? You mean here?" He nodded, his eyes drifting back to the window. "Just for a bit. It's been so long since I've been home." A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced a smile. Okay. I guess that's fine." I moved to clean up, hoping he would change his mind. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring out the window, unmoving. I cleaned the kitchen, tidied the living room, and even took out the trash, but when I came back, he was still there. I checked the clock, 2 a.m. "Edward." I called softly, but he didn't respond. I stepped closer. "Edward." Slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes seemed darker somehow, deeper. "Thank you for letting me come back," he whispered, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. I swallowed hard, every instinct telling me something was very wrong. "Come back." He smiled then, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I lived here once. A long time ago. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I've lived here for over 5 years. I've never seen you before. His gaze settled on me, heavy and unblinking. You wouldn't have. I stepped back, suddenly desperate to put distance between us. I think it's time for you to go now, Edward. He didn't move. His eyes never left mine. I never left, he whispered. The room grew colder, the lights flickered, and the windows rattled as if a strong wind was blowing outside. But I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no rain. Just silence. I blinked, and he was gone. Panicking, I ran to the window, but the street was empty. I checked the front door, locked. I searched every room in the house, but he wasn't there. His plate, his fork, even his glass were gone, as if he had never been there at all. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with questions. The next day, I called the friend who had introduced me to Edward. Edward? She asked, confused. I don't know anyone named Edward. The line went dead silent. I checked the guest list I had written out days before. There was no Edward on the list. My hands shook as I held the paper. I knew I hadn't imagined him. He was there, wasn't he? Sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps by the window. A quiet whisper of someone watching, waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear his voice, soft and distant. Thank you for letting me come back. I was working the late shift at Maplewood Diner, a cozy 24-hour spot just off the highway. It was the kind of place where truckers, night owls, and the occasional drifter would stop in for a cup of coffee and a slice of pie. The neon lights buzzed softly, and the only sounds were the clinking of plates and the hum of the old jukebox in the corner. It was just after midnight when she walked in, a woman clutching the hand of a little girl. They were soaked from the rain, droplets trickling from their coats onto the tiled floor. The woman's eyes were wide and darting, as if she expected someone to follow her inside. The little girl looked just as frightened, her hand gripping her mother's with white-knuckled strength. I offered a smile, trying to ease the tension. Welcome to Maplewood. Sit anywhere you like. They hesitated, then slid into the booth nearest to the back. I grabbed 2 menus and brought over a pot of hot coffee. Rough night? I asked gently, pouring a cup for the woman. She nodded, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around the mug. Just passing through, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The little girl stared up at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I gave her a warm smile. Would you like some hot chocolate, sweetie? The girl looked at her mother, who gave a quick nod. Yes, please, she replied softly. I headed back to the counter, feeling a pit of unease settle in my stomach. Something about the way they looked, their wet clothes, the haunted look in their eyes, it didn't feel right. As I steamed the milk for the hot chocolate, the bell above the diner door jingled. A tall man stepped in, shaking off the rain from his coat. He had sharp eyes and a stiff posture, like someone always on the lookout. He glanced around the diner, his gaze lingering a bit too long on the woman and the girl. I forced a smile as he approached the counter. Coffee? I asked. He nodded, but his eyes never left them. I'm looking for someone. A woman and her daughter. Been driving all night. You seen anyone? My heart skipped a beat. Can't say I have, I replied, my voice steady. Just truckers and the usual folks tonight. He didn't look convinced. His eyes narrowed as he slid a crumpled photo across the counter. I glanced at it. The woman and the little girl stared back at me, their faces frozen in time. If you do see them, he added, leaning in, you let me know. It's important. I forced a nod, handing him his coffee. He took a seat by the window, his eyes never leaving that back booth. I brought the hot chocolate over to the little girl and whispered to the mother, he's here. Her face went pale, and she gripped her daughter's hand tighter. Please, she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears. You have to help us. Without a second thought, I nodded. Follow me. I led them to the back of the diner, past the kitchen doors, and down the narrow hallway that led to the storage room. I pushed aside a stack of boxes and revealed the back door. It opens up to the alley. Follow it 2 blocks and you'll reach the bus station. Go somewhere far. Don't stop. The woman's eyes brimmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching my hands. The little girl looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Thank you, mister." I gave them both a reassuring smile. "Go now, before he notices." They slipped out into the rain, the door closing softly behind them. I moved quickly back to the counter, just as the tall man finished his coffee. He eyed me suspiciously. "That woman and kid. Sure you haven't seen them?" I shrugged, wiping the counter calmly. "Nope. Just me and the jukebox." He stared at me for a long moment, then stood up and left, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. Through the window, I watched as he got into his car, headlights cutting through the rain as he sped off into the night. My shift ended a few hours later. The rain had stopped, and the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon. As I locked up the diner, I couldn't help but think of the woman and her daughter. I hoped they made it to that bus station. I hoped they found somewhere safe. My name is Jamie, and I live in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other. Last October, my friends and I, Ben, Mia, and Tom, were bored and looking for something to do. It was a chilly autumn night, the kind where the leaves rustle like whispers and the fog rolls in thick from the nearby hills. We had heard rumors about an old abandoned farmhouse just outside of town, a place where strange things supposedly happened. Ben, always the thrill seeker, suggested we check it out. "It's just a bunch of old wood and broken windows," he said with a grin. "What's the worst that could happen?" I wasn't so sure, but the others agreed, and I didn't want to be the one to back out. So, we all piled into Tom's rusty pickup truck and headed out toward the edge of town. The drive was eerie. Fog clung to the ground like a living thing, and the moon hung low, casting long shadows across the winding road. When we finally reached the farmhouse, I felt a chill run down my spine. It stood at the end of a dirt path, its roof sagging and windows shattered. Vines crawled up its sides, and the trees around it were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. We parked a little distance away and walked the rest. The air felt colder as we approached, and even Ben seemed to hesitate for a second before pushing open the gate. It screeched loudly, cutting through the silence like a scream. "You guys ready?" Ben asked, his voice trying to sound braver than he felt. We nodded, and he led the way. The front door was cracked open, hanging off its hinges. We stepped inside, and the smell of dust and rot filled our noses. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the broken windows. "Let's split up," Mia whispered. "Cover more ground." I wanted to protest, but before I could, she and Ben had already disappeared into the living room, leaving me and Tom standing in the hallway. "Guess we're going upstairs," Tom said, forcing a grin. The staircase groaned as we climbed, each step sending tiny clouds of dust swirling around our feet. The second floor was darker, colder. There were only 3 rooms, each one empty except for old furniture draped in sheets and cobwebs hanging like ghostly decorations. We were about to head back downstairs when Tom paused, his flashlight beam catching something at the end of the hall, a small wooden door. "What's that?" he asked, moving toward it. I followed, feeling my heartbeat quicken. The door was small and scratched up, barely big enough to crawl through. Tom reached for the handle, but I grabbed his arm. "Maybe we shouldn't," I started. But Tom just shook his head and pulled it open. A gust of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of wet leaves and something else, something metallic. I covered my nose as Tom shone his light inside. A narrow wooden ladder led up into darkness. "An attic," he whispered. I nodded, my throat dry. Tom looked back at me, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Let's check it out." Before I could argue, he was already climbing. I hesitated, glancing back down the hallway, but the silence made me uneasy. I followed him up, the ladder creaking beneath my weight. At the top, we stepped into the attic. It was cramped and cluttered, full of old trunks and dusty furniture. Thick cobwebs hung from the beams, and the air was heavy with dust. Tom moved his flashlight around, illuminating strange shadows that danced across the walls. "That's weird," he whispered. "What?" I asked, stepping closer. He pointed to the far corner. A single chair sat there, facing away from us. It was old, wooden, and covered in dust, but what caught my eye was the rope tied around its legs, anchoring it to the floor. "Why would someone do that?" Tom asked, taking a step closer. I grabbed his arm. "I don't know. Let's just go." But before we could turn back, the floor creaked loudly behind us. We both spun around, hearts pounding. The hatch to the attic was now closed. "Did you shut that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Tom shook his head, his eyes wide. He moved quickly, grabbing the handle and trying to pull it open. It wouldn't budge. He yanked harder, grunting with effort. "Nothing." "That doesn't make any sense," he muttered. The air felt heavier, colder. I could see my breath fogging in the light of the flashlight. That's when we heard it. A whisper. Soft, distant, coming from the corner. We both turned, our flashlights pointed at the chair. It was still there, untouched. But the whispering grew louder, like a chorus of voices, all murmuring at once. My hands began to shake. "Open it, Tom," I whispered, my voice cracking. He yanked harder, finally forcing the hatch open with a loud snap. We both scrambled down the ladder, nearly tumbling over each other in our hurry. We didn't stop running until we reached the front door, bursting out into the night air. Mia and Ben were waiting by the car, their faces pale. "What happened?" Mia asked, her eyes wide. We didn't answer. We just got into the truck and drove away, the farmhouse shrinking behind us until it disappeared into the fog. We never spoke of that night again. My name is Alex, and I've been working at the Crescent Pines Motel for about 5 years now. It's not much, just a small, worn-out place at the edge of town, surrounded by thick woods and endless silence. Most nights are the same, a couple of late-night travelers, maybe a trucker or two, but nothing out of the ordinary. That was until the man in room 9 checked in. It was a rainy Thursday evening. The kind where the rain hammers down so hard you can barely see through your windshield. I was half asleep behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine when the bell above the door jingled. The man walked in, drenched from head to toe, water dripping from his coat onto the linoleum floor. He wore a black hat pulled low over his face, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't say much, just placed 2 crisp $100 bills on the counter and slid them toward me. "Room?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, grabbing the key for room 9. It was strange. Most people ask for the cheapest room, but he didn't even flinch at the price. I handed him the key and watched as he walked down the hallway, his wet boots squeaking with each step. He never looked back. That first night, everything seemed normal. But the next morning, something felt off. Room 9's door was still shut, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign hung crookedly on the handle. I knocked softly. "Housekeeping," I called out, waiting for a response. Nothing. I waited a moment before walking away, figuring he was just a heavy sleeper. But by the second day, I began to worry. The sign was still there, the door still locked. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello, sir? Everything okay?" Silence. I went back to the front desk and checked the logbook. He hadn't left. Not once. His car was still parked out front, covered in a thin layer of pollen and rain. By the third day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I grabbed the spare key and walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I knocked one more time, my heart pounding. When there was no answer, I took a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The room was empty, completely untouched. The bed was perfectly made, the towels were still neatly folded, and there wasn't a single item out of place. But the strangest part was the smell. It wasn't bad, just strange. Like wet leaves and something metallic. I walked further in, my shoes sinking slightly into the old carpet. That's when I saw it. On the far wall, just behind the bed, there were muddy footprints, like someone had been standing there, dripping wet. But they led nowhere. They just stopped, right there in front of the window. A chill ran down my spine. I stepped back, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he'd gone out the window, but it was still locked from the inside. I checked the bathroom, empty. The closet, empty. I stood there in the middle of the room, completely baffled. I decided to head back to the front desk and call the police, just to be sure. As I locked the door and turned away, I heard it. Tap. Tap. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. I turned back slowly, my eyes fixed on the door to room 9. The sound stopped. I stared for a moment, then hurried back to the reception desk, my heart pounding. I picked up the phone and dialed the local police. They came within the hour, 2 officers who seemed more annoyed than concerned. They walked through the room, checked the window, the bathroom, even under the bed. Nothing. One of them shrugged at me. Probably skipped out on the bill. Happens all the time. But his car is still outside, I said, pointing to the dusty sedan out front. The officer glanced out the window and nodded. We'll look into it, he mumbled, scribbling something into his notebook before they both left. But they didn't look into it. Days turned into weeks, and room 9 stayed locked. I couldn't bring myself to rent it out, not after that. The car was eventually towed away, unclaimed, and the man was never seen again. I should have let it go. I should have just moved on. But I couldn't. One night, curiosity got the better of me, and I unlocked room 9 again. It was exactly the same, perfectly neat, untouched. But the footprints, they were gone. I remember standing there, staring at the blank wall, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Written on the mirror, fogged up as if someone had just stepped out of a hot shower, were 3 words. Room 9 remembers. I stumbled back, heart racing. I wiped at the mirror, but the words didn't smudge. They just faded slowly, as if being wiped away from the other side. I haven't been back to room 9 since. I worked the night shift at a small motel just off the highway. It's the kind of place that's always a little too quiet, with flickering neon lights that buzz even when they're off. Most nights are uneventful, checking in the occasional traveler, brewing stale coffee, and flipping through old magazines to pass the time. But one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It was a Wednesday. I remember that clearly. Rain was coming down hard, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Around midnight, just as I was nodding off at the reception desk, the bell above the front door chimed. I sat up quickly, surprised anyone would be traveling in weather like this. A man stepped inside, soaked from head to toe. His coat dripped rainwater onto the floor, creating tiny puddles at his feet. He was tall, with messy hair and eyes that seemed a little too wide. He didn't say a word, just placed a $50 bill on the counter and slid it toward me. Room for the night? I asked, reaching for the registration book. He nodded, water dripping from his nose. Room 12, he said quietly. His voice was strange, soft but sharp, like he was whispering right into my ear. I paused, my hand hovering over the keys. Room 12. I repeated. That room isn't. I mean, it's under renovation. The man didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared at me, unblinking, water still dripping from his coat. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced a smile. You know what? It's fine. I'll give you the key. I handed him the old brass key, and without another word, he turned and walked down the hallway, his wet shoes squeaking on the tile floor. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner, then shook off the strange feeling creeping up my neck. I sat back down, trying to convince myself it was just another odd traveler. But I couldn't shake the thought of room 12. That room had been empty for months. Since the flood last winter, it hadn't been touched. No bed, no furniture, just stripped walls and bare floors. I wasn't even sure the door would unlock. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight from under the desk and walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The rain outside seemed to grow louder as I approached room 12. The door was shut tight, the brass numbers dull and scratched. I hesitated before knocking. "Hello," I called out. Silence. No movement, no sound. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Finally, I pulled out the master key and unlocked the door. The room was empty. Not just empty, completely untouched. The floor was bare concrete. Dust settled thickly across the room. No bed, no curtains, just a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering dimly. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, my footsteps leaving clear marks in the dust. There were no other footprints, none at all. I spun around, half expecting to see the man standing in the doorway. But there was nobody. I flicked off my flashlight and stood in the silence, listening. That's when I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. I turned slowly toward the far corner of the room. Water. Tiny droplets splashed onto the concrete floor, pooling into a dark stain. I walked over, shining my light up toward the ceiling. But the ceiling was dry. There were no leaks. Drip, drip. The puddle grew, inching toward my feet. My hands started to shake. I stepped back, my shoes scraping against the concrete. That's when I saw it, a single wet footprint right next to mine. It hadn't been there before. Panicking, I backed out of the room and slammed the door shut, locking it tightly. I ran back to the reception desk and checked the ledger. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, searching for his name. But there was nothing. The $50 bill was still sitting on the counter, damp and crumpled, but the registration form was blank. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the desk, eyes fixed on the hallway, waiting for him to come back. But he never did. The next morning, I went back to room 12 with the maintenance guy. We unlocked the door together, and I braced myself for, I don't even know what. But the room was the same, empty, untouched, covered in dust. The puddle was gone, and so were the footprints. But something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, where I had seen the water pooling, the concrete looked different. Darker, rougher, like it had been patched up recently. I asked the maintenance guy if he had done any repairs in there. He looked at me, confused. That room's been locked up for months, he said. Hasn't been touched since the flood. I haven't rented out room 12 since.
I went on a weekend trip with two people I barely knew. Their names were Leo and Brian. We met through a travel group online. We all wanted to go somewhere quiet near the lake. It was cheap to rent if we shared, and I didn't want to miss the chance to relax before work started again. We booked a small wooden cabin called Lake House 9. It was in the middle of the woods, close to the water, and had just enough space for the three of us. The pictures looked beautiful. Calm water, big trees, and even a small deck out back. There was only one strange thing, the rental description said, do not enter the locked room. I thought it was just a supply closet or something the owner wanted to keep private. I didn't think much about it. The moment we arrived, the place looked even better than the pictures. We were excited and carried our bags inside quickly. Each of us picked a room. Mine was upstairs, while Leo and Brian chose rooms on the first floor. We spent the first night playing cards, cooking noodles, and laughing by the fire. It felt peaceful. But on the second day, something weird started to happen. I woke up early and went down to the kitchen. Brian was already there. He looked tired. I didn't sleep much, he said. Kept hearing something moving around last night. I thought maybe it was you. I shook my head. I didn't get up. I slept through the night. He gave a nervous laugh and poured coffee. Probably animals. But I wasn't so sure. Later that day, while Leo and Brian went out to fish, I stayed behind to read. As I sat on the couch, I heard a soft click from the hallway. I looked up. The hallway was empty. Then I noticed something odd. The door at the end of the hall, the one that was supposed to stay locked, was slightly open. My chest got tight. I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and pushed it open just a little more. The room was dark. I couldn't see much, just a tall shadow in the middle of the room. It looked like a figure, but it didn't move. I quickly shut the door. When the guys came back, I told them what I saw. Probably just a mannequin, Leo said. Lots of old houses keep stuff like that for sewing or storage. But Brian didn't say anything. He just stared at the hallway. That night, nobody made any jokes. We went to our rooms early, and I locked my door. At 3 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The room was quiet. But then I heard it. Soft footsteps outside my door. Then a knock. A slow, steady knock. "Leo," I said. "Brian." No answer. The knock stopped. I sat there in bed, frozen, waiting to hear it again. Then I heard a door open down the hall. But it wasn't my door. It was the locked room. I heard it creak open, then soft steps going downstairs. I stayed in my bed, heart pounding, until the sun came up. At breakfast, all of us looked tired. "I heard it too," Brian whispered. "That door. I heard it open. I swear." Leo tried to laugh it off, but even he looked scared now. We agreed not to stay another night. We started packing up. But then we heard something that made our skin crawl. There was a voice coming from upstairs. A soft voice. A whisper. It said something like, "Don't leave. Stay here. Forever." We froze. I grabbed my bag, ran out the door, and the others followed. We didn't even close the front door. We got in the car and drove away as fast as we could. We stopped at a diner 30 minutes away. Nobody talked much. We were still shaking. After eating, Leo said, "I need to go back." I left my phone. Brian and I said no way. But Leo insisted. He said it had everything. His work contacts, photos, even his ID. He said he'd go back alone and meet us at the gas station nearby in 15 minutes. We waited at the station. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. Leo wasn't answering his phone. We were about to call the police when Leo's car pulled into the lot. He got out slowly. He was pale and quiet. "Did you find your phone?" I asked. He nodded but didn't say a word. I noticed something strange. His shirt looked like it had dust or ash on it, and his hands were shaking. "Are you okay?" Brian asked. Leo looked up with eyes that didn't look like his. They looked empty, like he had seen something too scary to explain. "We should never have gone there," he whispered. "There was no mannequin in that room. There was someone standing there, waiting. They smiled at me. They knew my name." Brian and I were silent. Leo didn't talk for the rest of the trip. We dropped him off at his house, and he walked inside without a goodbye. A week later, I got a message in our group chat. It was from Leo's number. The message said, "Come back. It's better here." But when I called the number, a woman answered. "Who's this?" I asked. "This is Mrs. Carter," she said. "Leo's mom." "Who is this?" I explained, and then she said something I'll never forget. "Leo's been missing since last week. We haven't seen or heard from him since the day he came home from that trip." My stomach dropped. I looked at my screen. The message had been deleted. Leo was gone. And someone, or something, had used his phone. I found the apartment by chance. I was new to the city and needed a place fast. The ad said, "Quiet room available. Rent cheap. Only one rule, don't open the locked room." It sounded strange, but rent was too high everywhere else. When I got there, the guy renting it, his name was Matt, was friendly and quiet. The apartment was clean and small. There were 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. The third room, the one that was locked, had a heavy wooden door with a black handle. That room stays locked. It's my uncle's old room, Matt said. He passed away here. It hasn't been touched since. I asked if he wanted to keep the door locked because of memories or something. He just said, "It's better that way." I didn't ask more. It wasn't my business. For the first few days, everything was fine. Matt worked late hours, so I had the place to myself a lot. He didn't talk much, but he wasn't rude. He just kept to himself. I did the same. But on the 5th night, I heard something strange. It was soft at first, like a light tapping. I was watching TV when it started. It came from the locked room. I froze. I turned off the TV and listened. Silence. I told myself it was just the pipes or maybe the wind. Old buildings always make noise. The next night, it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I walked closer to the door. I put my ear against it. The tapping stopped. Then I heard something else. Breathing. It was slow and heavy, like someone was standing right on the other side of the door. I backed away. I told Matt the next morning. "Hey, I heard something from the locked room last night." He didn't look up from his coffee. "Don't worry about it. Are you sure it's nothing?" I asked. He nodded. "It's just the house. Gets noisy at night." But the look on his face didn't match his words. His hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. The tapping came again. Then a voice whispered, "Let me out." It was soft. A woman's voice. I thought I imagined it. But then it came again. "Please, let me out." I jumped out of bed. I ran to the door and stared at it. I didn't touch the handle, but I stayed there for a long time. The voice didn't come back. The next day, Matt acted normal. Like nothing was wrong. "Matt, I heard a voice last night," I told him. He looked me in the eyes for a long time. Then he said, "Don't ever open that door. No matter what you hear." He left for work and didn't come back that night. At 2 a.m., I was lying in bed when I heard scratching, like fingernails on wood. I covered my ears. But the sound got louder. Then I heard something move in the hallway. I got up and opened my door just a little. The hallway light was off, but the locked room's door was cracked open, just a little. My heart started beating fast. I didn't open it. Matt didn't open it. I walked slowly toward it. I whispered, "Hello." No answer. I pushed the door gently. It creaked open. The room was dark. A strange cold air came from it. I could barely see anything, so I turned on my phone flashlight. Inside, the room was empty. No bed. No pictures. Just an old chair in the corner and a broken mirror leaning against the wall. I stepped inside. As soon as my foot touched the floor, the door slammed shut behind me. The flashlight flickered. I tried the door. Locked. I banged on it. "Matt, help." No answer. Then the mirror began to shake. I stared at it. Slowly, a figure appeared in the glass. A woman. Her hair was long and black, covering most of her face. Her dress was torn. Her eyes were wide and empty. "Why did you open the door?" she whispered. "I didn't mean to." I cried. "Please, I didn't know." She pointed at me. "He locked me in. Now someone must stay." The mirror cracked from top to bottom. I backed away. The light from my phone died. In the darkness, I heard footsteps. Closer, closer. Something grabbed my arm. Cold and tight. I screamed. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. My phone was beside me. It was morning. I ran to the locked room. The door was closed again. Like nothing happened. When Matt came home, I shouted at him. "What's in that room? What happened to me?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me. "You opened it, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. He sighed. "I told you not to." "Who was she?" I asked. He sat down and told me. "She was my uncle's wife. She was sick, not in her body, but in her mind. He locked her in that room, said he was protecting her, and protecting the world from her. Then one day, he died, and she vanished. But I still hear her. She doesn't die. She waits." "Why didn't you warn me?" I shouted. "I did," he said. "I told you never to open that door." I moved out the next day. I didn't care about losing my deposit. I just wanted to leave. A year later, I saw a new ad online, "Quiet room available. Rent cheap. Only one rule, don't open the locked room." Same address. Same rule. He was looking for the next person. The next person to open the door. And maybe take my place.